Thank you for joining. Recording is in progress. My name is Dan Ziffer. Thank you for joining us for this lunchtime Zoom. We have a very special guest, and of course, we come to you from Moreland, the land of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people. Pay our respects to their elders and anyone present from their wonderful culture, which we continue to share across this land. We have a great group of people listening. We're going to be here for under an hour to hear some really interesting thoughts about some very important issues that will affect our lives where we live and potentially more broadly as well. I'd like to welcome everyone who has joined us here, but particularly our guest, Lena Huda. Lena Huda is a committee member of Walk Sydney. She comes to us from New South Wales. She's the co-founder of 30 Please and Safe Streets to Schools. You can find out more information about Safe Streets to Schools in the chat. Nick will be putting up some links there. It's an alliance of 13 health, transport, education and climate organisations who are focused on safe streets for more than just the safety aspect, for the broader benefits that they bring to society. She grew up in a residential street in Germany where 30-kilometre speed limits were implemented in the 1980s. And we are still catching up here. She's worked in senior positions for major investment banks in London. We are so pleased to have her here joining us in Australia, where she lives with her Australian husband and 4 children in Wollongong. Lena, welcome.
Oh, thank you. That was a really kind introduction. And yeah, thank you so much for having me here today. Very excited to speak to you. So I also wanted to say I'm joining from Darwin land today. So just to kind of get a little bit of an idea of where everybody is joining from today, I just put that into the chat. So I think that's what we expected. So it's your local area where you're joining from today, and it's really good to see you all here.
So we have a lot of guests here today from Moreland Council and from the local kind of Brunswick area in this inner city part of Melbourne. Lena has a presentation, which if you go to the website mentee, menti.com, and put in the code that is available in the chat, you'll be able to see some of the things that she's able to present. But essentially inspired by global campaigns, looking at a focus on 30 kilometre an hour limits in residential streets, an evidence-backed, low-cost measure to promote walking, cycling and active transport for saving lives, preventing injuries, but also promoting stronger communities amongst the people who actually live in that area. So I will leave Lena now to make the presentation, go through some of the information she has, but please do bring your questions either in the chat or to myself, and I'll have a few questions for Lena at the end. But please, Lena, go ahead.
Thank you. So we are going to go to this one later again, but that was just, where I asked everybody where they are joining from today. But now let me start some thoughts about this. So this is actually my mom on a bike in the neighborhood where I grew up in Germany. 30K speed limits when I was a little kid was rolled out for a long time. And I grew up in basically an environment where cars watch out for kids. And kids are playing on the street, kids walk to school unsupervised, and that's still like that in Germany now. So it hasn't changed, and I think the 30K speed limit played a big part in that it was possible to kind of keep the balance in neighborhoods. So that was already, that is actually me when I started this campaign. It's actually not even only like 2 years ago. I moved here and was one of the first things that I noticed that I thought the cars were going too fast through my neighborhood. And then also when I moved here, we had bushfires. So everything was full of smoke. And that really triggered me. And I thought I'm gonna dedicate my time to try to make a little, solve a little piece of the puzzle, or try to help to solve a little piece of the puzzle with climate change. So how to get to more active transport. That also has a lot of other benefits. So And in this, to get this change done, so I'm part of Walk Sydney. So we're thinking about everything walkability in Greater Sydney. I founded 30please.org with some academics who have been writing about this for a long time in Australia. And Safe Streets to School is a local campaign. I started with parents in Wollongong, but actually that's the one that I think is very good for community engagement. So we're rolling that out Australia-wide. And yeah, that's, that was me when I started this, just like a letter drop to my local neighborhood with my kids. But, I moved on from there. So now, oh, sorry. So, so maybe let's talk about something that maybe people think about when we say, oh, we should go slower. So what are we actually saying here? So how long does it actually take to get somewhere? Let's look here at data. So we, when we want to go somewhere for 1K, like a short trip, when we take the bike, that takes 4 minutes, and walking is around 3 times slower. So it takes 12 minutes, but it's both very efficient in terms of your time to get somewhere, because obviously you don't have to look for parking. And so I think also when, if you do like cycling, it is a pretty good way to get around town. And we're going at an average speed of 15K when we ride a bike. So now when we look at car travel, so just the pure driving time, not the time to find a parking for 1K, takes 2.9 minutes when the speed limit is 30K, and it takes 2.3 minutes when the speed limit is 50K. So, considering we're only talking about local streets, we're not talking about arterial roads, and, probably most people live within 1K of a bigger street, or maybe within 3.5K for sure. We're not asking people to, change the way, what time they get up in the morning if we did 30K in local streets. It's a really minor change. And just to, using that same data to make this point, if you want to have the travel time, you need to double the speed you're going. So it's not just, there is a very big difference between, for example, as I said, 10K and 30K. There is actually time difference on how long it takes us to get somewhere. But then anything above 30, especially in an urban area, that is another effect coming into play, and that is intersections, traffic lights, congestion, because we can't actually go at an average speed of the speed limit through neighborhoods anyways. So the marginal, increase, like the marginal benefit of going faster than 30K through local streets is very, very minimal. And the other thing that we really have to keep in mind is that the reason why cars are so deadly also depends a lot on speed, because the human body can only sustain a certain amount of kinetic energy. When you get hit by a car, it's the mass times the speed, but it's speed square. So there's a real, like a physical relationship with physics that we can't change. It is always going to be dangerous to be hit by something fast, like this bullet. The bullet is tiny, but it kills you because it goes so fast. So this graph shows how the risk of death goes up significantly. Anything above 30K, when a car hits a pedestrian, anything above 30K becomes very dangerous. It's double as deadly to be hit at 40 than 30. So there's 40K speed limits that we use in Australia. I mean, they're obviously a lot better than 50, but they're not still a lot more deadly than 30. And then it really goes up significantly when you go higher. So, when you put these two graphs together now that I've just shown you, then you kind of probably understand why this is kind of the sweet spot for neighborhoods in terms of getting somewhere in a reasonable time and not killing people and not, taking away kids' freedom so that they can't play outside, things like that. So this is obviously like more like the scientific backing. You also you use it all over the world and you can see it works. That kind of speed limit that does create this great neighborhoods, but there's also maybe this kind of backup and kind of data. So, and when I was also moved to Australia, I was like, oh wow, no kids are in the neighborhoods. And then we went on holidays to a holiday park, and then I was so amazed that in that holiday park, the cars were going slow, watching out for kids, and kids had the license to be free, like what I was kind of expecting, how I actually imagined Australia is going to be like. I did not know that it's not like that. Basically in Wollongong, it's definitely not like that. There's not many kids playing on the street. And here in that holiday environment, you even have that social norming where, you know, other people tell you off if you go too fast. It's not just the speed limit, but it's also the expectation that you set. It goes together. But when you go slower, we do start watching out more. There's a lot of psychology with that happens. So in terms of, you know, the idea that kids should be able to walk and cycle to school without getting hit by fast moving cars is actually not controversial in Australia. The Heart Foundation also found that the majority of Australians support lower speed limits in neighborhoods, and 13% of people are unsupportive. And I think sometimes in Australia, some unsupportive people who are like very status quo, they get a lot of, you know, attention. And part of our campaign is to give those people a voice who are saying, no, we are actually happy to give up the, let's say, 1 minute of our day, if that means we can create a better society, a juster society, and something where kids have freedom. And I think we should really be, our politicians, I think they're underestimating that also we are, as you know, this is actually, you know, from the people I know here, there are a lot of people with good values. The majority of people would also, you know, give up things. We can't just always assume people would not be, you know, that they're just saying, no, not gonna do that. The other thing is with speed limits, and that we have that data from the UK, is there's some bias in there. So often people who support, like in the UK, the 20 mile per hour speed limits, they often think that they are in a minority, even though they are not. So, and that is another problem with this. So I think we have probably similar, you know, similar thing happening in Australia. So we're, you know, we're having a very few starting very slowly, and that's what we want to change. We want to do this faster. So, you know, the city of Yarra, for example, they have been trying 30K, and they have a great webpage. I really recommend you to check that out. It's called Thanks for 30, and it has brilliant information on it. And then in New South Wales, we have some trial zones, and also, you know, where I live, they're going to do a little trial zone. And also in South Australia, they have some safe and active streets, it's called. So they have 30K limits. So it's still very, very like new concept. But, you know, it's starting slowly. So the one thing that I often see in advocacy that in Australia, there's like the tendency for some people to kind of say, oh, let's go for 40 because that's not so controversial. And it's like in the middle. But, you know, it's not in the middle because 40 is double as deadly as 30. And the difference in travel time, as I was talking before, is so minor. So why would we want to have 40K speed limits? Also, the UN, there's actually a mandate. The UN has mandated 30K speed limits in areas where cars mix with pedestrians and cyclists. And the you know, and my view on this is as well, the infrastructure here for walking and cycling is so poor. Why would we want to have 40 in Australia, whereas these countries, you know, like Holland, Germany, and so on, there's so much better infrastructure in place already for walking and cycling. They go for 30. Why would we think that for us 40 is a good limit? It just doesn't really make sense, because you do have to spend quite a lot of money still on infrastructure when you have 40K speed limits in local streets. So, you know, when you do area-wide 30K speed limits, you get the kind of message. So first of all, you know, a 30K sign, especially if we maybe put, you know, something a bit like our logo on it, it creates a message to drivers that says, look, you know, you have to watch out here. It's not, you know, this is not like a racing track. And also when you drive slower, you have an increased corner vision. You know, you get tunnel vision when you go fast, and you actually will find it really hard to see what's going on next to you. If you go slower, you can start watching out. And then, you know, we hopefully get the more kids playing and walking, riding outside. And then you get safety in numbers again, because that's one of the problems. Once you know, let cars take over your neighborhoods and less kids and walk and ride to school, you lose that benefit of safety in numbers. And then, you know, you hopefully get this, you know, go to a stage where the residents, and that's what we have in Germany, and I think it would be the same here. Then, you know, if as a resident, if you know, have a car speeding through your neighborhood and it's 30K, then you have a really good argument to go to them and say, look, you know, my kids are playing here, can you please go 30, because that's the speed limit. I find that actually really tricky in Australia, because I let my kids play on the street. We live in a cul-de-sac, but there's sometimes drivers who do not want to watch out, and I find it really hard to talk to them about it because it's a 50K speed limit. So, when we talk about lower speed limits and streets, we need streets that are easy to cross. I think that's pretty obvious. And you can obviously, and that's what I see a lot in our campaigns, people want crossings, and obviously I also like crossings. But, you have to obviously, we have to acknowledge that it do cost money, especially when we have fast speed limits, we need to raise them. And it often costs like $50,000 plus for one crossing. When we have area-wide speed limits, then you do education, you do enforcement, you do light traffic calming when necessary. And then streets also become easy to cross, because factors on how easy it is to cross the street are the number of cars, the driver behavior. Maybe, in Germany, they actually stop when people want to cross the street, and so they actually stop. We could get there too. The speed and the crossing facilities. So it's not just infrastructure, there's other things that come into play, how easy it is to cross the street. And just to, how big that could be. So the local streets, they probably in a lot of cities make around 80% of the street network, even though we don't spend much time on these streets as a driver. They do, that's a big kind of area that they cover. And that's why it's so changing. If we get these speed limits down on the local streets, then we basically, for infrastructure, for the separation, good walking, like pedestrian footpaths, the cycle lanes and crossings, we only have to roll them out or like make them better on 20% of the network. And especially if you then also think about low traffic neighborhoods, that's something where you try to really prevent people from wet running through neighborhoods. You create really nice neighborhoods, really connected. So the other thing that you achieve when you have lower speed limits, you can do a lot, can do stuff cheaper. So here on this picture, you can see they just painted a footpath on the street because the street is slow. And then you don't have to raise the footpath, and then you can actually create a lot of things that are great for communities, because most communities want footpaths, but why don't we have them? Because of the cost. And it does actually make a difference if you do reduce the default speed limit. So because 30 Police is saying, look, the default speed limit should be 30K. And from there, you think about what are our arterial roads, what are the fast roads that we want to have faster. And those ones are also the one where you spend on walking and cycling infrastructure. And we had a reduction of the default speed limit in Australia before from 60 to 50. We didn't change the streets, we just did that. And we had a 19% reduction in casualties on those roads. So it has worked. It's not that it doesn't make a difference. And because some people say, oh, well, you can't do that because you need to completely change all the street layouts before you do anything like that. But there's a lot more than just the street layout. Obviously, you can build streets so people go slower. Not, of course that's the case. But you can also do a lot of things with speed limit sign, very light infrastructure change, and with community engagement and enforcement. Because like if you look here at these, and especially when you drive on like fast streets, you will see the speed limits changes all the time, and the driver behavior, people, adjust their speed. It's not just the environment, there's more than that. So sometimes people say, oh, we should do 30K, but only in high pedestrian areas. And that's a bit like, well, we actually want to really increase walking and cycling in Australia. So just saying, oh, this is here where the high streets is, that's not enough. Also, people need to get to the high street. So we can't just make, a broken network where only the high pedestrian areas are good. And the school zones in particular, also they have actually, just by putting the signs up, it's actually another, proof that you don't have to, change all the streets to make this happen, because the school zones, they obviously are liveable, so they haven't really changed much there either, and they have really reduced injuries. But when you get driven to the school zone, you basically really benefit from it because you cross the street within the school zone. If you walk to school from your home, then you basically leave that safe school zone, or relatively safe school zone. And then the cars are even reminded to speed up to 50 or even faster when they go out of the school zone. And that's not really fair to the kids who walk to their home. So the value for money, and that's lots of research on that, is higher for the society if you do area-wide speed limits rather than just little isolated streets or something like that. And you obviously, traffic calming is good, but then you can kind of target it where the speeds are too high. And the other thing that is, I just want to mention, because sometimes people, they really like speed humps, or like, I don't know if people like speed humps, but speed humps are not great for emissions because they encourage like acceleration and braking behavior. So you get more emissions from cars. You also get noise. In Germany, actually 30K is often rolled out because of noise. There's a very strong regulations on protecting residents from noise. And that's why you want to have lower speeds, because they really help with that. But you don't want to put in speed humps because they do the opposite. So there are other things you could do, like, for example, the paint that I showed before, but also, repetitive signs that display your current speed, education, enforcement. And obviously, the thing that I personally, think we should be raging about is technology, because there is something called intelligent speed assist, very cheap, available, mandatory in the EU for new cars. And that intelligent speed assist basically gives the driver a warning when they exceed the speed limit, and it also slows them down and they have to override it if they want to speed. But then it's a very purpose. You can never say, oh, I didn't know what the speed limit was. It's a very kind of, it's a decision to break the speed limit. And that is very effective, very cost efficient. And we could just, say, why don't our cars have that? Our new cars, why don't fleets have that? Why don't taxis have that? Because actually, even when you retrofit with that, then it costs more than $93. But even when you retrofit, you start saving fuel and so on, because you also get more smoother behavior. And why don't we have that? So the other thing that might be, interesting is that, obviously we have in Germany, we did this 40 years ago, the 30K rollout. And over time, it was actually, first there were bike lanes in these 30K zones, but then over time, they realized that it was safer in these quiet streets not to have separation, because then the cars would watch out more and the signaling would work better, because you have, obviously, it's tricky sometimes when you, as a bike, when you cross the street and the car is not aware that you're there, that's where you have a lot of crashes. And sometimes it can actually be safer not to separate. I know that's maybe a little bit, people find that strange, and it's not. I know people like separation, and I can understand, because we're not really used to like slow cars, but it's not necessarily always the safest thing. And kids in particular, they actually really like to be on the street. They don't necessarily like a tiny thing. So, I hope you can see what kind of an enabler would mean for us if we, did 30K, because we could have street trees, footpaths, outdoor dining, pedestrian crossings, all these things that are a lot harder to do at higher speed limits. And I think that would be really nice for all communities. I just quickly want to show you, I'm almost finished with that, how this, just 1 minute
Walking
video.
and cycling are the most sustainable transportation modes. Yet in many cities, they are also among the most dangerous. Low-speed zones are key to protect pedestrian and cyclist-heavy areas, making them safer for all users. The concept is simple. Outer roads with no contact with pedestrians or cyclists remain over 50 kilometers per hour if needed. Arterial roads are set to 50 kilometers per hour or less. The rest of the city is set to 30 kilometers per hour or less. A new WRI and World Bank guide presents methods for planning, designing, and building these zones in cities large and small. With support for active and shared mobility, low-speed zones help build safer, more sustainable cities and neighborhoods.
Yeah. So how do we, what do you have to do? So one thing we did is this, as it was mentioned, Safe Streets to School is our community approach. So what we do here is we, just volunteers from the community sign a petition, and the petition says we want, more kids to be able to walk or ride to school. So they either need pedestrian crossings and footpaths or 30K speed limits. So basically saying, this is a safe system approach, and this is what our kids should find 2K radius of schools, which is normally like considered the walking catchment of schools. And this is basically our vision is that kids can actually walk by themselves, independent travel, kids being able to play on quiet local streets. And when you look at, these data from different countries, so you see really, basically it's normal to walk in these countries to school where the typical speed limit on the street is 30K. And then Australia and US scores very low in terms of all rich countries, in terms of the share of kids that walk or ride to school. And they have high speed limits compared to the other countries. And then we have some very unhelpful government messaging, or also road safety charity messaging. And that is something around the idea that children under 10 years old have to hold hands when they cross the street, which also is something I find very disturbing, because how are we even gonna supposed to ride a bike with our kids? How we, I have 4 kids under 10, how I'm gonna, does that mean I'm not allowed to walk anywhere with my kids? How is that, what kind of messaging is that? And then when we think about kids' well-being, UNICEF measures kids' well-being, and it's actually a combination of mental, physical health, and skills. And Australia scores very low compared to other countries, very, very, especially mental health. I think it's number 34 out of 38 rich countries for kids' mental health. And we know that kids' well-being is correlated to kids' independent mobility. And also Australia scores very low on kids' independent mobility. So if we want happier kids, we really have to think about how do we give them back their freedom? How do we make it possible that they can travel independently? And so that's probably why I'm very passionate about this topic, because I want happy kids and I want them to have, a happy future. So what we do as well is we do a lot of, we try, the media is very interested in us, so we do media work. And it's actually interesting, is the most emotional response I think we get when we talk about this kids being able to play in the street. And you can see, for example, that picture that I let the journalist take there. I was kind of thinking if I want to do that, being like on the street with my kids in the middle of the road, because, that's a bit like controversial in Australia. It should we be on the street in this way? But actually this kind of article got the most engagement, and a lot of very conservative people there actually also, then think, oh, why can kids not play on the street anymore? And then obviously we talk about 4 times the amount of cars compared to 1970s. Nothing has been done to address this, to put the balance into place. And then now we're kind of out of balance. And I think that's important that, so we try, that we not just, basically I say stay in the bubble with our, supporters, but also try to reach out, and like media is one thing. The other thing that we did, so we did an event, we just did that last week, and it was a really positive event. So we worked with 3 school communities, and we combined a right to school day with a slow down day. And the kids got lots of information, pretty similar to what I did with you, obviously a bit more targeted at kids, why 30K would be so great for the local streets, and also a lot of benefits about walking and riding. And then we, the whole neighborhood got flyers about the slowdown day, where we encouraged drivers to slow down voluntarily to 30K. And really, really positive community response. They were really, and the kids in particular, they were really good advocates, and they were talking to their parents about it. And so, that is obviously important also to show that, we got lots of positive media. We had no negativity around it. So, people do want to, fix this. And, if it means you have to go slower, that a lot of people are on board with that. So, the Safe Streets to School is easy to do a chapter. So, it's a chapter strategy that we're building up. So, we would love if there was a chapter for your area that, that you would found. It's very, we make it so it's very scalable, easy to copy, because we give you web page, petition, IT setup, social media setup, and then local groups have to form the local partnerships, local media, talk to local politicians. And the Dan mentioned that before. So recently we started, we were asked to be part of this bigger alliance where we say this are our ask for the federal elections, and the first ask was lower default speed limits, and that is part of the strategy is to build partnerships. And so these are the strategic partnerships where getting different advocacy groups asking for the same things is a very powerful way to get change. And then if you think that's not possible, then maybe think about how public smoking was changed. When I grew up, I went to nightclubs and I was always completely covered in smoke afterwards. It was really not something I thought I would ever change, and we have changed it. So we can change things. It's just important that people ask for the same thing, and people advocate for it. So yes, so that was my my slide. So now if we could do mentee now, then I do that.
I'll do that. Lena, thank you for that presentation. That was absolutely fantastic. I should acknowledge that in the room today we have our Mayor, Mark Riley, and councillors Monica Harty as well, and the CEO of our area, Kathy Henderson, and staffer Gordon Brown is here as well. What you've talked about has such relevance to the areas that we live. And also it helps us step outside of ourselves. A friend of mine lives in Austria and got a letter from his child's school asking not to walk with their child because it was important for the child to walk by themselves to school to develop their independence. Here, I live 150 metres from my children's school, and for safety reasons, because they have to cross two very busy roads where cars frequently travel at 60 or sometimes even 80 kilometres an hour illegally above the speed limit, I would not let them do that even at a much later age. You talk about the barriers that exist, essentially, like the barriers to social change regarding smoking. The biggest one seems to be essentially the prevalence or the dominance of the idea that roads are for cars. How have you, through the different groups you've been involved, been able to change that perception? Is it through small trials, or has it been more successful when there's been really broad rollouts and they've just tried it, as they have, for example, in this very substantial trial in Yarra?
Yeah, the substantial trials are definitely better. That's normally where you get, that's what we should be doing. I think there's really some very interesting information from actually Vic Health about how to tell your story. So for example, streets are for everyone is the kind of when we have on social media in particular, we reach out on social media to lots of different opinions, let's say. When also on the articles and media that gets published, there's lots of comments, and then people say, oh, the roads are for cars, and then we are like, no, streets are for everyone. And then you can actually see that if you tell your story, a lot of people can follow that. There was, I would think there's this kind of 13% of people who, were also saying they don't want lower speed limits in neighborhoods. They would say streets are just for cars. But it's not something that the majority of people think, especially when you remind them that kids were used to be able to play cricket on the street, It's obviously public space. It's a space between houses, and then we just say something simple like, well, people need to cross the street, or are you saying you want to ban people from leaving the house outside of cars? But there's a lot of very easy kind of answers, I think, to that. But it's important that is kind of the story that the media also picks up, and they we also call that out. For example, recently a kid was killed in Sydney in front of a childcare center, a toddler, by a car, 50k an hour. And then the media wrote, oh yeah, we have to investigate why the kid was on the street. And you're like, well, hang on, is that, that's an odd question to ask, The question is, why do we have fast moving cars in front of a childcare center that kill our kids? And pointing that out, I think is important. Yeah.
We sometimes social change happens and actually things take a while to catch up. So, for example, with the explosion in rideshare services, with increasing fuel costs and actually the increasing cost of owning a car, there's a chance we've reached kind of peak car certainly in the inner city areas where half of the Moreland electorate, local government is. More people will over time use sharing services or public transport or taxis rather than actually own a car. But that shift hasn't been reflected in what we saw down here in Victoria with regards to where we were locked in our 5K area. I think when we had that, we saw when people were in their 5K area and couldn't leave due to COVID, that we saw more of a focus on those areas, people starting to spend more time walking, more time riding. The opposition that you face in this topic is kind of repetitive. It's about travel time. It's about a choice of rights, over who gets to dominate. How much success are you having in shifting that now that we're in this new COVID environment where people have been forced to spend more time in their local area? People are seeing the issues of the fact that in many ways the roads are set up for people travelling through their area and not people who actually live there, and trying to promote this message of more active and sustainable transport.
But, we only started this 1.5 years ago. And like, for example, yesterday we were invited to Parliament in New South Wales, and there was a small event for the launch of Friends of Active Travel. So the Minister for Active Travel and Cities was there, and some other, cross-party politicians who invited us for Safe Streets to School. So yeah, I think that is, they obviously also know that we do the main thing is about the lower speed limit. So, we get invited, we get heard. I also can say that some people I know, some influencers here in town, they were kind of watching us. So our local MPs, for example, they were not, when we started this campaign, for example, one local MP, he wrote in the newspaper, 30K is a bad idea was the heading. And I wrote to him, actually, I haven't really written to him, and I did write to him 3 days ago and said, we're invited to this active travel thing. Are you there? Because he would be invited. And then they said, we love your campaign and how good is what are you doing? And no, we want to see you another time. So, sometimes people can also change their minds on things. And I think we have to obviously be very open to that, because it's maybe not as obvious. That's a problem with the 30K stuff. I think it's pretty obvious we want our kids to be safe and we want them to walk and we want them to be active. We want them to be happy. But maybe to make the links with the 30K speed limits, if you don't take, 5 minutes and an open mind to look into the evidence, it's maybe not as obvious as I wish it was. And so I think that's part of the barrier to get us there.
5 to 10 years ago, the Melbourne Central Business District lowered its speed limit from 60 to 40. And it is safe to say that people lost their minds until it actually happened. And then there were no bad impacts. And it took the same amount of time across the city and everyone just got on with their lives. It might be different in New South Wales. Certainly in Victoria, there's a level of bureaucratic difficulty. So we have some fantastic people listening from the council where we're based here, and they have some power over there, mainly the residential streets. But where they intersect with more arterial roads and larger roads, where those things cross, the bureaucracy can get in the way. It might be different in New South Wales, but what are your experiences of navigating that issue where there are different people in control of different areas?
Yeah, it's also a problem here, definitely. The speed guidelines actually don't allow for 30K speed limit in New South Wales. And I think historically Victoria has been more progressive than New South Wales on these topics. So I think it's a matter of the councillors writing, to the transport authorities and to the state government and saying, we want to have that option to reduce the speed limits. And because if you do that, if you make especially the default to 30, we could create great communities, especially connection as well. I think that's such an important thing, to connect people. When the cars go slower, you do create that. I know my neighbor so well just because my kids play on the street and the other kids join in. and then the cars go slow because my neighbors know that we're there. And otherwise, I don't think we would have actually made that connections to them. And it's really important for our well-being. So, and I think councillors know that, so that they really have to push forward, I think, as well, and get there, because, you know, really you could say, how can that be fair that the city of Yarra got it and, you know, others didn't? You know, I think I would, if I was a councillor, I would say to them, look, you know, how can that be? You know, they were allowed that trial, why can we not have a trial? I think there is actually another street in somewhere in Victoria that got a 30k speed limit recently. But also community groups, I think, you know, writing letters to politicians, to authorities, and sharing advocacy is actually really, really powerful.
You make a great point with the holiday park, talking about caravan parks in Australia and how essentially once you normalise and socialise the sense that there is low speed, and there's low speed for all these good reasons, not just the fact that there are very few signs, but there's a lot of people, there's a lot of children have autonomy on the road, is a good example of essentially an environment where you can say, well, this is how it works. You know, you have people listening on this call who make these decisions, who are going to be thinking about this concept of 30 kilometres for even a trial for a large area of where we live. What's the key thing you'd like to get across to them before we wrap up about the benefits, not just in safety and security, but in the kind of broader community of making this shift?
I think it's important, first of all, try to do a proper area, not just one street, because if it's just one street and it looks the same like all the other streets, it's very hard to get the message across to drivers. So yeah, do a proper area and, you know, try to do something to engage with the community on it, like, you know, maybe something like with schools to, you know, work with them, why that is for them. I think kids are great advocates, and it's also really nice for them to, I had the kids after the slowdown, I have watched them coming out and they saw the sign and they said to them, oh, Mom, today is slowdown day. All the cars have to slow down for us. And it's really nice to see that they make, you know, to see kids being able to make that link. So, you know, for communities, it has so many benefits, you know, as I said, social connection, kids being able to walk to school, elderly people being able to cross the street, active travel, less emissions, less congestion, in particular at school drop-off time. So yeah, I don't know, it's a really, really long list. And I think it depends on every person, what they, you know, what is the biggest one, but it's really the question, why would we not, you know? And don't underestimate people. I think I find this a bit ugly in Australia often, the way also the latest federal politics, they always assume that if there's not something in for the individual person, they're not going to do it. This is kind of the working assumption. But it's not true, you know, for example, with mask or staying home and all these. Australia is the country where people really, you know, they do stuff for society. They do. It's just not true that nobody is willing to give up 1 minute of their time to make it safer. I really think it's not what I see. I can't see that the society would be like that.
Lena, we have one question from a person, from Rod Duncan, who, if he can unmute himself and ask the question, and then we'll wrap up afterwards. Rod, are you there?
Thanks, Dan. Yes, that fantastic presentation, Lena. It's really, you've hit all the spots, all the good arguments, and it just makes so much sense. I've worked in this field and did a lot of research in Europe, etc. So I'm familiar with the 20 miles an hour across Bristol, for example, and stuff in Holland. But the question, I haven't got a preference either way. But once traffic is going at that level, like a caravan park, like a campground, does it become appropriate that the pedestrians in particular, and possibly the cyclists, have priority over the motor vehicles at that speed, because they're safe environments for that, but there's one object that's bigger than all the others? So is that the sort of point at which you flip over and say, in these areas, the cars are invited guests rather than the dominant player in those spaces?
Well, I think it's a good message to say cars are guests in neighborhoods, because I think they are to some extent. I'm always very careful not to, push too much. 10K speed limits, for example, I think they have their place, for example, in a play street. That's something we have in Germany. We have some 10K, very short stretches of streets where there's heaps of kids. But I think we also have to acknowledge we do want to get around, so that's why I do the travel time. Nobody else normally talks about travel time because they think it's, too, I don't know, controversial or whatever. I don't think it is. I think it's 3 times faster than 10K, maybe not quite 3 times, but probably close to that. And it still works. We know internationally 30K works pretty well for local streets in terms of nobody, once you do it as a driver, it's such a non-event. Like, it's really such a non-event because, once you're at the arterial street, you can go faster. And I think we also obviously have a lot of room to improve that. So on an arterial road, that's probably the difference. You don't really have to watch out as much because, for example, the bikes, they have a bike lane, they're not going to be on the street, and there's crossings and so on. So you do have that hierarchy that you know where you are and you know what's expected of you, and that's kind of blurred here. It's all a bit, where there's no real difference in speed limits between like a major through road and a little side street, and that creates confusion.
Can I just come back with one quick thing, observation? I've worked in areas where we said, let's put a bike lane in, and the pedestrian advocates said, no, a bike lane gives 1.5 meters on each side, which is a safety thing. People will drive 10 k's an hour faster. And so not having the bike lane, the other issue, of course, is that if a car's doing 30 k's, it's roughly the speed of a bike anyway. So that difference in speed, that is the issue's gone. So I'd actually advocate even the 30k that you don't have bike lanes, because it actually creates an incentive, that psychological thing of having a wider area than they otherwise would, increases the speed response.
Yeah.
Yeah. Lena, thank you again for your time. The Brunswick Resident Network is holding other meetings during the year. We'll have a candidates forum before the November state elections, which we have down here. The contact details and some of the reports that they've done on traffic in the area over the past decade are in the chat. They also co-host a working group just pretty much on walking issues called Walk on Moreland, which is on the 3rd Tuesday of every month. Thank you again for sharing your expertise with us. Thank you for everyone listening, particularly the staff and the councillors and mayor of Moreland Council, for giving up your lunchtime and your time to talk about this important topic. Thank you again, Lena.
Thank you.